Okay, we're here. It's March 1992 with Edith Wulfemeyer and Irma Milster and Red Wulfemeyer and Dad if he comes along and Dave Milster and Barb Milster. We're talking about childhood remembrances.
What year was she born?
Mama? Just a minute, I can tell you. She was 28 when I was born. Well, I'm just trying to think when she was born. Do you know when your daddy was born? My dad was born? Was
1887.
87?
Mine was born in 88. Yours was born in 87.
87. I think she was 4 years younger than Dad. So she would have been born in 1891. 1891. Yeah, that would be right.
She was 4 years younger than
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she was 28 when I was born in 1919. 1919. And let me see what else.
She was 5 feet.
I think she was about 5'2" or 3. I don't think. Somebody said they thought she was under 5 feet. I didn't think
She
so.
was 5 feet.
Was she 5 feet? Oh. And because Rosalind and I are both 5'6".
taken after Grandpa.
Well, I think they said what happened is my grandfather was taller than my father. My grandfather married a small woman. So then my dad was smaller. Then my dad married a smaller woman. So Clyde was smaller. Then Clyde married a smaller woman. So your boys are smaller. It just, like that. But with the girls, we were tall. We were 5'6". None of us, my mother's people were small. My Uncle Harry was small. They were, but I have so many memories of my childhood. So many people don't have, but I do. I remember making decisions. I can remember my father spanked me when I was about 10, and I can still see me across his lap. He spanked me. I disobeyed him. And I can remember making the decision then I would never spank my children, and I didn't. Because my father was a person who always explained to you. He explained why. And I think the reason that I resented, it was so out of character for him to hit me. Usually he talked to you.
Why did he spank you?
Because I didn't mind him. And he told me, I was about 10. Every year we had fireworks. And Daddy would have a big display. And this one year he said we weren't going to have them because he explained why they were too dangerous. So we weren't going to have them. That was fine. So I went across the alley to visit these friends, and they had lots of fireworks. And they said, oh, here, take a sparkler. You can hold it. And I thought, boy, an adult told me, big deal. Of course I got burned. So I came home and
You grabbed the wrong end.
I don't know. Probably. I was a klutz. And so I went home, and my father was furious and put me across his lap and spanked me. And I can remember my mother's face standing there. She didn't interfere, And he was so angry with me because he took me to the city hospital. This is how I remember it. And they wouldn't let us come in there because he had too much money, I don't remember. I didn't die from anything. But I can remember that it just was out of character for him to hit somebody. We never were slapped or anything like that. And I just thought, all this proves is that you're bigger than I am. It doesn't prove you're any smarter. But Clyde doesn't remember things that I remember. I had lots. I had a wonderful childhood, just a wonderful childhood. I don't remember being scolded much, I think that first 6 years, they really got us in line, and then you knew what the rules were, and you obeyed the rules, and you just...
That was the end of it.
You didn't get... I don't remember... As I remember that, see, so many kids my age were whipped with straps and stuff, my generation. But I just don't remember being scolded, and I obeyed the rules, and that was what you did.
Go down.
But Clyde just telling me, this time, he's telling me things that I never knew about. He talked about how he worked at this baker when he was 8 or 9 years old, helping them fry donuts, and how he rode with, was it the paper man or something, delivering papers? I didn't know about any of that.
Well, he was, what,
5 years older than I am, yeah. So I would have been...
Rosalind was halfway between?
Yeah, Rosalind 2 years younger than Clyde and 3 years older than I am. Mm-hmm. But Clyde certainly had more freedom as a child than I had. I just stayed right in the neighborhood. We just stayed close. But
Dad always talked about he and Grandpa going squirrel hunting in the summer.
Oh.
And they'd go squirrel hunting, get 3, 4, or 5 squirrels in the morning and bring them home. That's what we all had for dinner.
Yeah.
he made it sound like in the summer they did that every day and you ate squirrel for supper practically.
Well, I don't know if it was in the summer or not, but we had Miss Torchek had some property at the Merrimack River, and there was a cabin there that was there we could use, and we would go out to we called it the country, and we would stay in the cabin, and Daddy would squirrel hunt and fish, and we would have squirrel then. And then one summer we went down to Lake Taneycomo, and I remember he hunted there. And have you ever seen a squirrel skin, how they do it? Well, you know, just like you're taking, stripping clothes off of somebody. It just makes like a onion, like a union suit or something. And Daddy stuffed it with newspaper for me. Of course, it smelled in a couple days, but I thought that was pretty good.
So it looked like a real squirrel?
Well, after the skin's dried.
Yeah, well, he did it right away, I think, you know. And then there was a Lake Taneycomo there, and I remember we had hats that were 2 layers, swimming caps, 2 layers, and you'd blow up the outside so it would hold your head up off of the water.
Say that again?
We had bathing caps, you know, swimming caps, and they were made of 2 layers, and they had like a little plug that you blow up a ball, and you'd blow it up so there was this layer of air of it to hold your head up out of the water, so you wouldn't drown.
That's a new one.
I was going to say, by the time your head was under, I think your
I
nose
think you
would
were
be under.
supposed to do this, you know, like that.
Rest, so you could rest on your back while you were sunbathing.
Never heard of those.
Yeah, that would have been, I don't know, 1930, 31 or something. But we used to always take a trip in the summer. Did your dad tell you that?
Yeah, vacation somewhere.
Yeah, we would always go on vacation. We went to Denver, and we went to Washington, D.C., and we went to Florida, and we would travel. It seemed we were gone a long time. We probably weren't. You know, maybe just a few weeks, I don't know. But we always took trips, and that was kind of unusual during the Depression. I didn't know anybody else on our block who ever went away.
How long were you gone?
I don't know. It seems we were gone a number of weeks. Maybe we weren't because I was young, and things are different, you know, when you're young.
There's a man that lives around the corner, and he was selling a pop-up trailer. Wasn't it the guy? Maybe it wasn't him. Somebody else I know said that when they were kids growing up, that their dad was a teacher, and they'd be gone for 2.5 months.
Yeah.
They'd take their pop-up camper or camper and tour wherever, and with the tent and camper, there's very little cost. You just take your food costs.
Well, I remember that at those times, I think most teachers did take vacations. They would travel, and I think Mildred probably took John and Marcella, didn't she? I would think she did, because most teachers, I don't hear of teachers doing that, but in those days, teachers would travel. That was one of the pluses of being a teacher, you could travel. And I don't think we ever camped because my mother was a very mild person, but I can remember her saying she wasn't interested in cooking along the road. I think she felt she'd cooked all year, you know, so we would stay in a motel and eat out. You know. Funny little motels, not like they are now, just little, I don't know what they call them, tourist cabins they call them.
Like
And-
the Coral Court over here.
Motels.
But they weren't nice motels, they were just little tourist cabins. Yeah, and then we would sometimes stay in private homes, just get rooms in a private home.
Modern form of a bed and breakfast.
Yeah, but they didn't feed us, I don't
No.
think. We just had a room in their house. But,
I wasn't here all the time. Did you speak much about Nina? We really haven't heard anything other than she was pretty short
We talked about when she was born.
when she was born.
yes. Yeah, she was
Put on
20.
there what you said about Penina.
Oh, yes, my grandmother's name was Penina.
Oh.
My mother's name. My mother's was Nina, and her mother was named Penina Mead. But I was reading in I don't know, with Agatha Christie, some English mystery, and there's a town in England called Penina, and it made me wonder if that might have been where they originally came from or something.
Is your background English? Mom?
Yeah, there's English, and my grandmother on my dad's side was Scottish, and then the Milsters, of course, are German.
Explains the temper.
Do Scots have tempers?
Irishmen are...
We don't have that. Oh, that was one thing. My father said to us, you do not have a drop of Irish blood in you. And talk about the shanty Irish, you know.
Now, is there or isn't there?
There is no Irish
Oh,
blood as far as I know. Red's family has Irish blood, but no, we were Scott, English, Dutch and German, as far as I knew, you know. But my mother was just a very mild person. I can never remember her raising her voice to me. My kids can't say that.
Grandpa, you did all that for everybody, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I remember in the later years he said, I know you all liked your mother better than you did me because I had to do all the disciplining. But my dad really never changed his hat when he came home. He was always a headmaster, always a teacher, just always a teacher.
Well, did your mother then just kind of take rule, or, I mean, take commands that he gave, or did she ever stand up to him, or?
Well, I don't really remember, no, I don't remember that at all. I just remember that my father just thought my mother hung the moon. And I guess she was just willing to, you know, he just thought she was the smartest thing, and she was really smart. He just thought she was just clever. He just thought she was great. And when he had met her, they met at Cape Girardeau Normal School. And my mother had lost her mother when my mom was 15. And her father was a railroad man, and he had a housekeeper, and there were all these girls and a boy, and the housekeeper was there, and these girls, I don't know, they were spoiled, I think, terribly. And so she was just, I have pictures of her when she was younger, and she was just had lots of spark to her. And she had a beautiful voice, and she was a good pianist. And so she sang, she had the lead in the Mikado. I had those pictures of her. And she was, and sang in the choir. She was just quite a gay little girl, I think. And then she said when she met my dad, was fresh from the country, and she said he was so green if you'd stuck him in the ground, he would have grown. I remember her telling me that. But then Daddy moved to, I guess Clyde may tell us differently. I think it was Oakville. And my mother went there, and it was funny how she told us. You think people are different nowadays. She went there to, she told my grandfather something. She was going to go to St. Louis to study music or something, but she was really going to be near my dad, you know. Mm-hmm. So she went there, and she taught for him. She taught under him, and then they got married. And she said at that time they thought if they ever had $1 a day, they'd be rich. If Daddy ever had a job making $1 a day, they'd be rich.
Well, how old was she when she got married, you know?
23. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So she wasn't straight out of high school, or?
No, she went to college. And
I'll give you 3 minutes before we have to leave.
Oh, that's right.
Tell us that story again.
I met your Aunt Edith on a blind date. She went to school at the Harris Teachers College with Daisy Bradley, and who was dating a friend of mine, Les Benner. So I had just broken up with a girl that I had been going with. In fact, I was engaged to her and we broke up. And so they got us together.
They matchmakered you, huh?
Met on a blind date, and I was driving a 39 DeSoto at that time. And the day I met her, I was driving up from a ball game from South St. Louis to North St. Louis, and I ran into the back end of a car.
Whoops.
Down there on the car. So I always tell your aunt that I had 2 accidents in one day.
Accidentally met her and ran into
So
somebody else.
we went together, I guess about 2.5 years before we became engaged. And
So,
then
what year did you meet?
I met her in 39. I had 300 miles on the car.
Oh,
And then the war broke out. I went in the Marine Corps, went out to San Diego, and went through boot camp and was assigned to a squadron on North Island down there. And I got 2 weeks leave and came back, and we got married. And drove. We had bought a 1941 Chevrolet business coupe from your dad, and we piled everything we had in that and drove out there. Didn't know where we were going to stay or anything else. We got into San Diego and stopped at a motel on El Cajon Boulevard, and then through some other Marines there, we found a rooming house, and we stayed in there. And I think there were 4 couples of Marines in there,
wow.
and then the lady that ran the place, and had 1 bathroom.
Oh, no.
So Edith was getting gas one day, and the guy at the gasoline station told her there was a house on a small court over on Bancroft Avenue in San Diego. So she went over there and we got that little house.
Now, were you overseas for a period of time?
I was only overseas about 8 months. I just went to Hawaii, and then the war ended and I came on back. And then when I went over to Hawaii, then she flew back to San Diego with Joanne. Joanne was born out there in San Diego on...
So, was she with you in Hawaii?
No.
No, okay.
Well, when I went to Hawaii, she was in San Diego, and then she and Joanne came back and stayed with Grandpa and your grandma and Grandpa. And then when I came back out of the service in December of 45, I called these friends of mine that I bought sporting goods from in San Diego, Stanley Andrews Sport Goods Company, and they asked me if I wanted to have a job, stay out there. So I called Edith. She said, fine. So the only way I could get back to San Diego at that time, I took a bus
From St.
from
Louis?
San Diego to St. Louis. And I got in there right before Christmas of 45. And then I had to report back out to San Diego by January the 2nd, the day after New Year's. So I went on back out there, and then your Aunt Edith and Joanne, and then my brother's wife flew out. And then we were there ever since until I was called back into Corps in 50 for Korea, and I spent a year back there and then got out. Stayed in the sporting goods business after that.
Were you selling or buying sporting goods back in pre-war days?
No, I worked for Procter & Gamble in St. Louis.
Oh, you did?
But after I got out of boot camp, went over to the Naval Air Station there, waiting for assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember who it was, but somebody recognized me from St. Louis, and they had a softball team, and I had pitched softball here for George Cicero in St. Louis. And so they told the colonel, and the colonel pulled me out of the casual company, and I more or less was, I guess, his orderly for a while, and then they finally put me over in the Special Services, which handles all the sports activities and all that sort of the Marine Corps.
So you're like an expediter?
Oh, you had programs and you bought sporting goods and kept the troops supplied with ping pong balls and golf clubs.
Kind of like a buyer then?
And then I bought sporting goods. That's how I met the people at Stanley Andrews. We used to go over there to buy the sporting goods. And then when I came back and I called them, they offered me a job. I had 2 weeks leave one year, and they needed somebody to come in and do some work, so I went in to work for them while I was in the Marine Corps on leave for 2 weeks. And evidently, they thought I did a job, whatever I was doing at that time.
That's great.
But I started out as a salesman calling on schools and the military, and did that, and then I became the wholesale manager. We had a wholesale division, and from that moved on up the line and finally ran the place for 30 years.
That's great. So Joanne was born in 42, 41, something like that?
She's born in, let's see, I went in the Corps in 42. She was born in 44
44?
on the Naval Air Station in North Island. She was cost us $12 for her birth. Navy doctor delivered her. Then Craig was born in San Diego. I never can keep the dates straight. I'm not a great one for remembering dates. Craig graduated from high school, then he went to the junior college for a while. Then he was real crazy about cars and everything, so he wanted to buy a car, so he dropped out and went to work for General Dynamics. And then they had a big layoff. He went to work for Solar Aircraft. And then he came in and he worked for me, or worked for Stanley Andrews. And he worked his way up till he became the wholesale manager. Then he was offered a job by Expansion Sportswear, who makes baseball uniforms and all that. and he became the production manager there. Then Spangen sold out here about 5 years ago, I guess it was. And he kept working for the company, and I can't remember the company that bought him out. But then one day, when the new company bought him out, they closed down. They had 2 shops, and they closed down one of the plants, and the other plant was for sale. So this fellow that owns this professional hospital supply came to look at the plant to lease it. And Craig showed him around, and about 2 days later, he called Craig up and asked him if he was happy with the job he had. And Craig said, well, not particularly. It's a lot different when Spangen owned it than these people. So John told him, he said, well, he says, come in and talk to me. So Craig took his resume in, and John called him a day later, and he said, well, he says, I got good news and bad news. He says, I can hire you, and I got a job for you. He says, but he says, all I can do right now is meet the salary you got from Spangen. Craig said, fine.
Yeah.
So he went to work for John, and
So that's what he's working for?
Yes.
What's the name of that company?
Professional Hospital Supply. They're in Rancho, California. And they just, about 2 months ago, they just made him a vice president. So he's real happy. You.
Yeah?
Yeah. You were talking in the car about your grandfather.
My mother's father, George Rogers, as I was told the story, was in the Civil War as a drummer boy when he was 14 or 15 or something. And then my mother and her sisters and brothers were his second family. He had a first family, and they all died from the bloody flocks or something. And so then my mother and her 3 sisters and the brother were his second family. And he died when my mother was about 40, and I think he must have been close to 80, because that was a second family. I can't remember what else I tell you about him. Oh, did I tell you about Penina? Well, my mother's name was Louisa Meade, and my mother was named Nina, but my mother's grandmother's name was Penina, and there's a town in England called Penina. My mother's mother died when my mother was 15, so I did not know her. And
Do you know how old she was?
I don't think she was this young. Because at one time I did know. I probably have it at home. I can't remember. But I don't think she was a very young woman. In fact, it seemed to me that she was like 30 when she started her family, so she wouldn't have been young. But they said she died of a long, lingering illness, and I always thought that was consumption or something. I don't know what it was. But my mother went to Cape Girardeau Normal School, and that's where she met my dad. And that's when she said he was so green, he was fresh from the country, that if she'd stuck him into the ground, he would have grown. But she...
And you say she was like 23 when...
She was 23 when they got married.
The country dialect, the southern Missouri slang that they have down there, the twang. Grandpa had none of that. Did he have that when you were young?
I never knew him to have that.
So having come from the country background, he still had a very crisp...
Yes, but I think my dad grew up part of the time. I think he was in St. Louis sometime, because I think he was a paper boy when he was a little boy. I don't think he was always in the country. Didn't my dad live in Poplar Bluff for a while? Do you know?
Well, he had some of the slang, like the
But not
slop and the wash bucket and the
That's little sayings.
Yeah,
But
but
I'm talking about
cliches.
No, not the cliches. I'm talking about the southern talk
he
and
didn't
the
have any of
country
that.
language, where
He didn't.
everything's
No,
kind of
he never
farmer
spoke like that.
drawl.
The only thing I can remember that I thought was so interesting, my grandmother talked about taters. Not potatoes, but taters, but I never heard my father talk like that. He always talked very crisply, But I don't think he was in the country all the time, because he did talk about having had a paper route. And I remember they lived in the country when he was in his teens, because he wanted to go to school so badly. And his dad would say, well, if you'll help me do whatever the chore was. One time it was building a house. Then you can go to school for a couple of months. And then he would do that, and then he would work. And then one time his father didn't follow through and didn't let him go, so he really had a terrible struggle getting an education. I think he started teaching school before he was out of high school, what they used to do that long ago. Took him years and years. He was getting his master's degree the summer I was 9, and that would have made him 41. And we went to Columbia, Missouri that summer, and that's when he got his master's. So that's why it was so important to him for us to have an education, and he gave it to us on a silver platter because he'd had to struggle. So my mother had not had to struggle like that. There was no problem with her going on to school. But I think my dad at one time had a carriage, I don't know what they call it, a place where they rented out carriages and horses. What was it called?
Buckboard.
I can't hear you.
No, buckboard or, no, livery.
Hostelry,
The
maybe?
livery.
That's what it was. I don't remember that, but I think my dad told me that my grandfather had that. I have a
I
feeling.
think I remember hearing that.
I have a feeling they were here and there. I don't think they just stayed in one place. I think they moved. You know, they were in St. Louis sometimes, and then they were down by Perryville, and then they were up in St. Louis. And my grandparents, when I was young, lived in St. Louis. My father's people, and they lived in North St. Louis when we lived in South St. Louis at the Holly Hills address. And in 1928, we had this cyclone, and it hit the northern part of St. Louis. And we went up to my grandparents' home, and the whole front of their house, they lived in a flat or something. It was like a dollhouse. The whole front was gone, and you could see all the rooms, just like you can a dollhouse. Now, Clyde tells a story about riding up on his bike to see them. I'm so surprised hearing these things from Clyde this year, because the only thing I can figure that although my father was very modern about education and women, he didn't think women had to get married. He was very ahead of his time. But yet, when I think of how much freedom Clyde had, and that Daddy would have, I was about 10 maybe, Clyde would have been 15, to ride a bicycle all the way to North St. Louis to see how my grandparents were. I felt much more hovered over than that. I mean, my sister and I never went anywhere. We just stayed home, you know. But then Clyde talks about having helped a baker when he was 8 or 9 fry donuts, hot grease. And he talks about going around with the man who delivered papers and doing all that. I never did anything like that. So I suppose my dad, growing up in the country, was never hovered over, and I guess that they weren't fussy about Clyde. I don't know, because that was all new to me. I never knew that.
Didn't have to worry about it.
I suppose that's true. But of course, I don't remember ever wanting, but then as I said, I do remember when I was in my early teens, and I was such an immature child, that there were half a dozen of us who used to walk from Holly Hills all the way down past Hampton and go through those woods and hike over to the river to Pear, and we did some really dangerous things, and I don't guess my family ever worried about it. But you know, if you've been like that, then when you grow up and have children, you think about those things. Now see, I think my mother never ever thought about those things. But I was always thinking, what are they going to do next? Because I could remember. I didn't get in trouble about that, and I wasn't naughty, but I was always thinking of kind of interesting things to do, and I had a son like that. You know, he'd been the kind, if I hadn't watched him, he would have flown off the roof to see if he could fly. Now, that's kind of why I was.
Craig, you mean?
Craig.
I'm curious about something.
Yes.
Clyde said you never really celebrated Christmas
Yeah, that's true.
or birthday.
Well,
Do you remember?
at Christmas, we always had a tree. We certainly never had anything religious. We had a little Swiss village, little houses under the tree.
Did you get the tree that night, or?
I can remember when I was probably 5 or 6. I remember this vividly. That it was the house over on the street with Mount Pleasant School, and we were down in the basement because Santa Claus was going to come. And they were moving around doing things, and I had to go to the bathroom. I remember that I was 5 or 6, and I had to go to the bathroom, and I didn't know what I was going to do. That's what I remember about Christmas. So there must have at some time been that. But I do know my father would never tell us there was Santa Claus. My father had a thing about lying to children. And it's a funny thing, that carried over. That's with me, too. See, I would never tell my children there was Santa Claus. I didn't tell them not to, but my father left such a mark on me about that, see, I really feel you
That's
have...
not why I feel that way. I don't think that telling the falsehoods of Santa Claus is good for their spiritual growth.
Well, I don't. How do they know
Because
Jesus
how do
isn't?
they know the difference between
Santa Claus and
is fake
Jesus?
and Jesus
What
is
is
real?
all this junk they see on television, all these talking animals and all that stuff?
But
They're not against Jesus' birthday.
They're not saying that those are real creatures.
What, to children they are.
No, they're not.
But I know, but as I say, I don't know. A lot of things my father did I didn't buy into. But I really have always been so fussy about that kind of thing, telling children straight. Now, I mean, I'm not going to tell them things that are going to scare them, but if they're going to ask me, and when I took the children to the doctor, I remember one time I was really upset with this nurse. One of the children had to have a shot, and we were there, and I was with them, and my kids were always good in the doctor because I was right there with them. And she said, now, it's not going to hurt. And I said, don't tell, maybe it's Craig, don't tell him it's not going to hurt. It will sting for a minute, and then it will be all right, and I'm right here. But do not tell this child that it's, then how do they know what to believe? Craig had a standing thing. He said one time, he said, you know, if I were dying and I thought I was dying and everybody came in the room and said, oh, Craig, you're not dying, I'd think, right. But if my mom came in and said, no, you're not dying, I'd know it was really real because that's something. But, you know, I was going to tell you something else about,
But you don't remember Christmas particularly.
Yeah, we got presents, but they had nothing to do with Jesus, nothing to do with it. We had presents. Doesn't Clyde remember presents?
He doesn't remember trees.
Oh, yeah, I can remember we had a tree in Holly Hills right in front of the jet there, you know, by the fireplace. That's where the tree was.
By the fireplace.
Mm-hmm. On that, we had a little rug then. That's where it was. He doesn't remember that.
Well, that's
He and
what
I
they
don't
had for years on the
Pardon me?
table. They used to put it on the little table.
Well, when I was little, it was a big tree.
A bigger tree.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't so little. We moved there when I was 9, so I would have been older. But, you know, talking about being so truthful, I remember one time when Craig was 4 or 5, and that's so often a fearful stage for children, and he said, Mommy, what if you die? And, see, most people could probably say to a child, oh, I won't die, but, see, I can't do that. So I just said a quick prayer, and I said, honey, God knows that you need me, and he won't ever take me as long as you need me, because I said, God always will provide for you. And to him, he heard, Mama's not going to die. But I knew exactly what I had told him, and I figured that if something happened to me, he would remember that I told him God would always take care of him, and as long as he needed me, I wouldn't be taken from him.
Mm-hmm. Well, yesterday you were talking about the eating and how Grandpa Milster always ate just what he was supposed to eat, and he was so healthy because he ate so good.
Yeah.
How you had the chocolate candy in the drawer, and
Yeah. But you see, he would eat 3 pieces.
yeah, that's what you
And he would eat an apple, and he'd eat a few pecans, and he'd eat a piece of meat this big, and 8 glasses of water, and he never ate spaghetti or any Mexican, any spicy foods, never ate any, no alcohol of any kind, no cigarettes, no pop, no anything. And I think probably if you do eat everything in moderation, I don't think it does hurt you. He was a living example of this. He was a healthy, healthy man.
Well, it was interesting how you guys knew you could go in the drawer any time, but that you're only allowed those 3 pieces.
And isn't that, it never occurred to me to take 4. But I really think that I always felt my family was so fair. And I wouldn't have betrayed his trust in me. I mean, he trusted us, and that's why when he spanked me, it was so out of sync for Daddy. It just wasn't like him. And I resented him doing that because, and I think he could have said, they didn't use the word grounded, but he could have said, I was very gregarious, he could have said, you can't play after school. That would have been, I would have thought, that figures, if I'm not dependable, I can stay home. But spanking me didn't make any sense to me.
So that's how he always reprimanded, was spanking. It was never grounding
No, I guess you didn't hear the whole story. I disobeyed him because he said we couldn't have fireworks. And I understood why. He explained the whole thing, and I went across the street where these people were, and they were having fireworks. And he said, oh, here, you can hold a sparkler. And I thought, an adult told me. And I knew I was playing games, but I thought, I'm not really doing it. Well, I got burnt. So I went home, and my father was furious, and he spanked me. And I can remember thinking, this doesn't prove I can remember, I could see that child thinking, this doesn't prove you're smarter than I am. It doesn't prove anything except you're bigger. And I will not spank, and I did not spank my children. I thought I can talk to them, you know, because it was
So he talked out of most
everything,
situations.
absolutely everything. You know, when I wanted to go to Stevens College and Clyde was in medical school, he sat down, explained the whole thing, that medical school was very expensive, and that he wanted me to have a way to support myself. And Stevens College was very expensive. It was really kind of like a finishing school. These girls were being raised to get married. I didn't belong there. But he said, Harris Teachers College will give you a good education. You can get a job here in the school and so on. And he said, but then after you finish college, and Clyde will be out of medical school, then you can go any place you want for a master's, and I will pay for it all. Now, see, I never felt put upon about that. That made sense because you couldn't just go to any medical school, but I could get but everything. And I remember when I went to visit one of my friends who was going to Missouri U. Let's see, I was a junior, so I was about 19. I was a junior in college, and she was a junior, and I went to visit her. This was in 1938. This was 1938. And she was staying in a boarding house. There were 8 girls in this boarding house. 1938. She was the only virgin in this house. Now, you think it's different now. This was 1938. And I can remember one of her friends had an abortion. This is 1938. And this
This was in a boarding school?
This was at Columbia. She'd been 2 years at Seton's, and now she was in Missouri U in the journalism school. And she was a junior, and I was a junior. And it's funny, my dad was so interesting. I can remember coming back, and we were upstairs in my bedroom, and we were lying across the bed talking like this, and I was telling him all about this. And I can remember him saying to me, you know, this is a very interesting time of your life. And I've told more people this because it's so true. He said, up to this age, it's everything your family has told you. Now you're getting input from all other people, and you yourself have to put these together to find out what you really believe in. And that's true. Because if you never make that judgment, then you're just going to tell everybody what your family, and that's not going to be you. Mm-hmm. And I had many wonderful conversations like that with him. He was just it was marvelous educator is what he really was. He was just a wonderful educator.
He sounds like he's a good listener.
Mm-hmm.
That whole concept is still